I was pretty aware that I never wanted to work in an office. I never wanted to work in a cubicle. A friend of mine from my high school was a cellist in Gypso, and he got tickets for me and my mom to go see them perform Verdi Requiem at Symphony Hall in Boston. I just had that like tunnel vision thing that happens when you're experiencing something that you are just really, really into, and like, you know, almost crying and like trying not to cry because I was like, I'm 15, I can't cry, I'm a man. To my memory now, it's sort of my like coming of age moment. It's like the first time that I actually felt like I fully experienced beauty.
To me, it's the closest and most visceral experience we can have to genius. Music gets inside you somehow in a way that, at least for me, very few other artistic experiences do.
It was about, maybe I was 5, 6 years old. There was this radio broadcast of classical music. I was just playing with toys, and I remember this piece just came on, this really slow moving, beautiful thing. And I had to leave all my toy soldiers on the bed, and I called my dad. I asked him what that was. And he said that's the second movement of Tchaikovsky Violin Concerto. At that moment, that was it. I mean, I just knew that I had to be near or in this music, this sound. It just rocked my world completely.
Apparently, it was the only thing that calmed me down as a baby. My parents could just plop me down, and it was specifically the Mozart violin concertos.
These are works of art that are some of the greatest achievements of humankind.
I was fascinated. I was fascinated by what I heard. It fell into my soul. Music is, for me, still the same thing. It has the same importance as it had to me as a child. Every concert, every rehearsal, every day, every score, is for me filled with nourishment of life, for life. And also, I think it is wonderful to let other people participate in that intensity.
Musicians who you're seeing are so focused on what they're doing, and often under a tremendous amount of pressure. And people don't always realize that we get very nervous.
I can remember very vividly the first time that I had a destructive level of performance anxiety. It was the first and only time that I took the Tanglewood Music Center audition. As soon as I got to Boston, I was immediately inundated with all this rhetoric about how important Tanglewood was to a musician's career. So I immediately set about, preparing this audition, and I worked really, really hard on it. I spent time in my lessons every week, working on the repertoire. I prepared as hard as I'd prepared at that point in my life for this audition. And I took the bus over to Symphony Hall, and you audition on Symphony Hall's stage. I just put the bow to the string and shook the entire audition. The entire audition, my bow never stabilized once. I was so nervous. I had never felt that before. And I have to laugh to this day because it was so awful. I mean, I played terribly. I came back from that experience just shattered, like shaken to my core. Like, oh man, not only did I not get into Tanglewood, but like, I can't play in front of people. I am screwed. I thought that was it, And I immediately convened the brain trust with my teacher, and I'm like, we gotta fix this now.
I think a lot of it has to do with just the process that we have to go through as a musician. You know, my mom told me before I was doing grad school auditions. I mean, it's a big deal, but when you're a senior, it is the thing in your life, you know. Oh my God, I gotta get into grad school. And I just remember talking to her. She's a middle school guidance counselor, so she knows how to talk to people who are stressed out. And she told me, she's like, Matt, you did not get into music to make yourself nervous. You got in it because you love it so much. You love playing percussion so much. You love being back there. You know, you did it because you love music.
When you're looking to audition for a symphony position, you better have a brain.
Big Yeti kind of situation here for the herbal teas that I carry in abundance. So I got a fat stack of tea right here. Kind of helps calm me down. I had this going in the warm-up room today. Let's see, earplugs, so I can space out during the audition and not listen to the other people. Wet wipes, super important for an audition. Nobody plays good when you feel dirty. I've got my little journal. Yeah, just a lot of stuff. Trying to increase my understanding of sound and how to create it and how it interacts with us and how it shapes kind of our lives. Basically, I've been trying to whittle it all down to carry as little as possible with me. So trying not to overpack, but also try not to forget anything. Basically, to try to achieve, you know, a sense of mental freedom.
I was in the National Youth Orchestra of Great Britain, which I was desperately grateful to be in, and I'd done auditions and I'd worked and worked and worked to get into this orchestra, and it was one of my dreams to be in it. And every year they did a BBC prom concert, which was televised, and I got on that stage, and the second I sat down to tune, adrenaline was on me, and I just thought, I'm not going to make it through this. I can't stay on the stage. And I remember this horrible kind of conflict in my body. And I thought, no, it's going to be okay. I'm going to be okay. I will get through this. And it's a blur, really. But it was second by second. I was counting the pages until the end. And I was thinking, maybe you're having a heart attack. Maybe you've got food poisoning. Maybe you're going to pass out or projectile vomit. Or I'm going to lose control.
It's just a whole fleet of feelings that don't happen while you're in a practice room. Whenever you just get like a little bit conscious of the fact that someone else is listening to you, someone else is judging your playing.
But like you get on stage and you know your heart starts racing, you get tight, my hands get super sweaty.
My breath won't go all the way down, so I will do this shallow breathing.
It's like everything kind of turns fuzzy. It's like an out-of-body experience almost, except not. You're totally in the moment. But in the moment, sometimes you think, what's coming up? And then you over-anticipate, and then you play a wrong note. Don't play an A flat. And then you play an A flat, and it happens, and you go, oh no, I did it. And then you get everything thrown off. Not a lot of people talk about it.
It's really painful to not play like you know you can. Like to go out there and to play like somebody else or some inferior or subpar version of yourself. That really, really hurts, as any musician knows.
I'd look around at all of my peers playing away on stage and think like, they can't be feeling like this, because they're all just like, they look like they're enjoying themselves.
It seemed like almost everyone else had it figured out, and that I was the imposter, that I was the one who was not meeting the standard. You know, I had my senior recital, which is like, hey, you made it, you know, you're gonna graduate, like, it's great. This is the celebration of you being awesome. And that is not how it turned out. That was when I sort of started having like fantasies about getting out. And for that year, I wasn't playing for 7 months. It was not a like bright period in my life by any means. I didn't feel free. I felt like a failure.
When musicians are faced with challenges, because they spend so much time working by themselves in the practice room, they may often think that it's a problem that's only unique to them. And what we see across, well, musical history really, is that when it comes to performance anxiety and other problems and challenges that any musician may face, they are really widely experienced by even the best of players.
Show me an artist who says they've never had stage fright, and I will show you a liar.
If I've ever gotten nervous, when people think I've never gotten nervous, my answer is, fool them again.
The first time I played the trumpet octave call in Zarathustra, my heart felt like it was pounding out of my chest.
I would get a little shaky. I would get dry mouth, which is not so good for an oboe player.
My hands would get sweaty, and I would try to go through my piece in my head, and then I would get stuck in my head, and I wouldn't remember how it went on, and then I would panic.
My heart was just pounding. It felt like it was pounding out of my chest.
Things were shaking, and I just felt, out of body.
The first time I conducted Bartók Concerto for Orchestra, a very difficult piece, I think I was so nervous for most of that I had no idea how it went.
I could feel something at the back of my knee tremble, and then I had the bow shakes.
My sense of why I didn't talk about it and why I didn't try and reach out to people to get help to address it was I didn't want other people to think that I had a problem. I didn't want other people to think that I was weak.
Often it begins when we're 8, 9 years old, where all of a sudden you have to take tests and you have to perform and people are criticizing and judging and giving you grades. This brings on a whole different thing, whereas prior to that time, all we were doing was enjoying ourselves and there was no distraction. Now we have these distractions and we have these pressures. The higher level of accomplishment that you achieve from being a musician, the more pressure you can experience.
I went to a national conference for the harp, and it was the first time I was really hearing people play around me, in the practice room next door for this competition, and it really freaked me out because I grew up big fish in a little pond, and so that was a real wake-up call for me, and I remember being incredibly nervous and not playing well. I was overtaken by these insecurities, and at some point in time you realize, oh wow, these people are really good too.
I heard people my age playing the Brahms Paganini variations. I thought only recordings did that. I really did. I heard what virtuosity, accuracy, real perfect pitch ears, I heard all of this. I was scared. And I was also motivated.
For some people, being put into a competitive environment is an incentive for learning. And then in the process of learning, you accomplish something more that you wouldn't otherwise accomplish because you've been pushed. And in this way, competition is good that it inspires work and dedication to a particular goal. But it's not good when competition is the end goal.
Competition in the classical music world is a very real thing. You spend your time simultaneously learning from your peers and collaborating with them and competing with them for all of the positions in school. You want to be the principal in the orchestra section, and so you have to take an audition against the people that you want to be the closest to. So the pressure is on right from day one.
With so many college graduates, coming from Juilliard, CIM, I mean the best conservatories in the country, they're lining up for the same jobs, and the jobs are not getting any more.
When you're getting ready for the audition, you know your instrument, hopefully. You know exactly what the challenges are in the audition list. You've been with your instrument for many, many years. It's your life, it's your voice. Your problems are the instrument problems are your problems. You've bought the ticket, you booked the hotel, you traveled, you ate the bad airplane food, and you're there, you got some sleep, you did not drink coffee, or you're over-caffeinated, who knows. So when you're finally there, you're nervous, you see people you may or may not know in the waiting room, you're finally number 73, walk on the stage in this gorgeous concert hall in most cases, and you're looking at the screen, and you feel completely naked. Or beyond, it's like an X-ray. You're under the microscope, naked, and you're about to play, and every note lasts forever. It's eternity, and that's how it feels.
In an audition, what they do is they send out a list. It has the solos listed and each excerpt that they want to hear. So I just go through my files and print them off and put them in a book.
The different excerpts are generally designed to bring out a different side of your playing. The list is supposed to show by the end that you're a well-rounded musician capable of playing in different styles, different tempos, different moods.
I mean, the purpose of an excerpt is for a committee. They have to hear the whole orchestra behind what you're doing.
It's as if somebody's focusing on one of the dots of a pointillist painting, and that dot has so much personality and interest all by itself that you could just look at that dot and get satisfaction and a sense of the larger picture.
There's many different ways that auditions are run, but typically in America, they're blind, they're screened. So usually the committee sits behind a screen or some sort of curtain. They even put out like a rubber walkway so that they don't hear heels clacking or something like that. In the first round, you play anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes. You have no time at all to get comfortable. There's some very excellent candidates who just are debilitated by nerves. You see that all the time. And it kind of breaks your heart because an audition has to be the ultimate fair experience, so it's really based on how you play at that particular moment.
We're thought of here in Detroit as having one of the fairest audition processes. And yet, there are times when you go, well, yeah, it's fair, but is it right? We have 3 or 4 string players who, ever since I started here 9 years ago, have been what we call regular substitutes. Those we have vacancies. They're the ones who always come and play for years on end. And yet somehow, they just don't make it through the audition process. And yet we've engaged them to play for whole seasons. So they're good enough to play in the Detroit Symphony. What are they not good at? Play in the audition.
I took an audition back in June, and I get there, and I get on stage, and the heart rate just goes crazy. I'm sitting there for a couple minutes just trying to do all these different breathing techniques that I have to get it to calm down, but still, it takes a while to come back from that. It just felt like a wasted audition.
Well, definitely playing poorly or feeling like you played poorly in the moment has a little bit more of a nagging sensation to it. Afterwards, you sit there and you think, man, why did I miss that note? Or why did I take that breath there? Or why couldn't I keep my air steady?
If you're just going through the process without having some kind of record of it, then you just go with your emotions on how you feel like you played during that time, and that can be a little bit blurry, and that's kind of what the heart rate monitor helped me to kind of plug into a little bit. What am I doing in life? Am I drinking coffee? Should I cut that out? Am I getting the exercise I need? Am I doing the right kind of exercise? Am I eating a diet that kind of promotes less stress? All of those things that kind of morphed into this entire lifestyle that I go into whenever I go into audition mode. All of those techniques came from this initial data of okay, well, I feel like I'm getting nervous. I'm not able to represent myself the way that I feel I do in the practice room. Why is that?
Stress may seem like a byproduct of modern life, but the feelings which cause it are as old as humanity itself. An important part of our evolutionary heritage is the physiological capacity to respond instantly to a threat, or anything we perceive as a threat.
We all have receptors in our body that respond to the adrenaline or epinephrine release in our system. We have them all over our body, including our heart, within the brain, in our muscles, arteries, and these receptors respond to the so-called fight or flight reflex. When they're activated, for example, when we're stressed, they can result in a raise in heart rate, blood pressure, and they can shut down certain functions that are less necessary at that time.
You know, blood rushes away from your extremities to your major organs, right? And that feeling makes you nauseous, and it makes your heart beat really fast, and it makes your fingers and feet and your extremities tingle because the blood's rushing away.
Basically, our body is optimizing itself for strength and energy, which is great in an actual life-threatening situation. Strength, energy, great things. You run away fast, or be ready to put up a fight. On stage with our instrument, generally when we feel that energy, it feels like it's too much, or it's not good, or it's going to derail our performance, and the strength part, not particularly helpful.
You see these videos of like people who are able to lift cars when their babies are trapped or something. But unfortunately, the fine motor skills that you need, this feeling that you're being chased by a saber-toothed tiger is not really appropriate.
So generally what happens is when we start feeling that way, we start to question our ability to rise to challenge. So in terms of the resources at our disposal, it seems that we don't have the resources that we do need. So we start feeling more anxious, which then makes us feel like we're even in more trouble, which makes us more anxious still. It tends to snowball very quickly if we don't know how to handle it or don't know what to do or aren't sure if there's anything that we can do.
Musicians are small muscle athletes in that what we do is on the level of an Olympic level athlete. I know I don't look like an Olympic level athlete, but what I have worked so hard for and what I am training my students to do is to play the bassoon on the level that a person can do whatever sport they do that goes to the Olympics. This requires an extraordinary mindset. There is nothing ordinary about the mindset that's required to do this.
What is the most helpful thing to think about when we're performing? I mean, it's obviously not about what could go wrong or what people are thinking. And it's not even about planning for the really difficult passage that's coming up in 2 lines or dwelling on a mistake that happened. And it's not even really necessarily monitoring what's happening, because if we're paying attention to the mechanics of what's happening, it's like if you're chewing dinner and you start paying attention to all the little details of how you chew food, suddenly it's like, well, is this how I normally chew food or not? And that can throw us off on stage.
The inner game, we call it a game because it's a contest between 2 people, but both of those people are within the same body. And the first person is the person that we hear, this voice in our head that's always talking to us and telling us that we're good or we're bad or what to do or when something isn't going right, all of these thoughts. That's human nature. We're going to hear thoughts in our head all the time for our entire life. The other side of the thoughts is that if someone's talking, somebody's on the other side of the conversation. So that's where we have a second self, call it self 2. And that's the person that just is who you are and actually doesn't have a voice, doesn't even talk back. The self 2 just is music, or it's you breathing, and it's that music coming through in this wonderful state of what we call relaxed concentration, when everything just happens without any effort. You can't have it both ways. You can't have both this conversation going on and you can't be connected with your music at the same time. When you understand the rules of concentration and you learn about concentration, then it's easy to follow that path. The inner game, though, is based on concentration principles that have been around for thousands of years. It's really Eastern philosophy.
It's called Joriki, taking the attention and placing it where you want it. My mind, after 41 years playing professionally, is no different than my student's mind. I can still get lost. I can still miscount. I can be thinking about dinner instead of thinking about where I am. The difference between how I deal with it and you deal with it is I know that my mind has gone off the rails about 2 seconds after it's gone off. It might take you 10 or 15 or 20 seconds. We all deal with this, and that's the benefit when people come to Zen meditation. They think only their minds are jumping all over the place, that they're crazy, and then when you read these old stories about these old teachers, and they talk about their mind being like this, it's like, oh, this is just being human.
What's happening for me is that the attraction of the habit of thoughts and the thoughts and the emotions is becoming less, and my choice is becoming more. And yes, I still attach to thoughts, I still have the same thoughts. Meditation is not about not having thoughts. They're always there because our mind is active, but it's beginning to use your mind as a tool.
I found out myself that before a performance, I kind of have to empty myself, maybe in a sort of meditation, so that the whole body and the whole inner life can spread new.
To me, it's crucial that right before I perform, I have to almost meditate. And part of that is letting the adrenaline wash through my body. When you try to resist it, you tighten up your muscles. And so now there's always a moment where I have to just sit down without my violin for a good 10 to 15 minutes and just breathe really deeply while letting the adrenaline sort of wash through me. It makes my mind very clear, and it's just a tiny shift in consciousness where suddenly I'm chomping at the bit and I'm ready to go and I really want to go on stage.
What I've come to understand is that feeling the juice, which is what I call it, is something that I'm going to feel. It's going to happen. And rather than trying to not feel the juice, I've come to accept the juice and use the juice.
One of the key misconceptions, perhaps, that I think clients and students have is that the whole goal is not necessarily to rid ourselves of performance anxiety per se. I mean, anxiety sometimes is a little bit overused as a word because it turns out that anxiety is what they call a multi-dimensional construct. It's not just this bad stuff that we experience. A better word for it, which you'll see more often in the literature, is activation. You know, that's the physiological feeling excited or up, or, you know, the heart rate goes up, or just a little bit more energized. And that can actually be a very helpful, productive experience.
There's a very interesting old law that was demonstrated over 100 years ago called the Yerkes-Dodson law. And in this, it's sort of what we call an inverted U-shape or a bell distribution, where the x-axis is the amount of arousal that a performer or anyone has, and the y-axis is how well they're performing. And essentially what it shows is that if you have no arousal whatsoever, you know, you're completely unstimulated and you're half asleep, that your performance is going to be very poor. And as you are aroused a little bit, the performance gets better. But of course, if you're absolutely petrified and just overwhelmed, then the performance drops. So it's an inverse relationship.
That inverted U curve is actually not global for everybody, but we all have an individualized inverted U curve. So for some folks, the curve is relatively narrow, so there's a very tiny window. If you get it right in there, then you're good to go. Other folks, it's much broader. So you know what? You could be located at a range of different anxiety or activation levels and still perform your best. And for some folks, it's located at the low end, so you have to be pretty calm. Other folks, it's in the moderate end, and other folks, it's actually at the high end. So they need to be pretty up and pretty excited. Otherwise, they're not going to have a great performance. They're going to kind of fall flat.
It helps me a little bit to have that adrenaline flowing. I've had really good performances where I've been just a little bit nervous, because I do believe that nerves are a little bit of excitement.
A lot of anxiety, a lot of nerves are not so much the fear of failure. It's a lot of the mix there is simply, I've been working on this piece for 5 months. It's going really well. I really want to deliver here. It's like anticipation of the event. And for me, that helped a lot in realizing, okay, you could be, you're allowed to be nervous. A lot of that is, I'm excited. I'm excited to play this.
Performance excitement is, I'm really motivated, I'm focused, I feel a sense of a crackling energy with my co-performers. And performance anxiety would be, I'm feeling all this adrenaline and now my hands are shaking, I'm getting tunnel vision, I can't think ahead, I'm sweating. So in many ways, it's how they channel the energy and how capable they are of dealing with adrenaline. So one performance skill is dealing with adrenaline. Understanding how do you respond in a performance situation when you get adrenaline. If it starts to get too much, do you understand how to breathe and move and have positive thoughts? Or do you just become a victim of it?
Basically every festival audition that I took, I couldn't get my spiccato under control. That was the absolute hardest thing to do. And I guess a part of me had learned to just expect that. And that's no good. That's no good.
Once people have had a number of experiences of feeling very anxious in important situations, they start to expect it to happen again. Now at that stage, of course, people, if they keep running that pattern, they just keep continuing to develop more and more experiences of feeling nervous in performances. At that point in time, they very often doubt that any form of mind training will make any difference whatsoever. But the fact is it already has. They've already been training themselves to go into a particular state in a performance. The only difference is that they've been training themselves to go into a state of anxiety where it's practically impossible for them to perform the way they want to, as opposed to creating a state of flow that people do when they're expressing themselves naturally and easily.
For decades, we thought our brain was the static thing that could never change. But now in the last 10 to 20 years, we've discovered that the brain is much more plastic than we thought. It's much more malleable than we thought. We can rewire our brain. In fact, we're constantly rewiring our brains. You know, when you're in the throes of it, it's easy to feel like there's nothing I can do about it. I'm just gonna have to live with this the rest of my life, find a way to cope. You don't have to just cope with it. There's simple ways to train your brain and teach it better habits.
If you're driving down the street and all of a sudden you hear sirens and your car lights up red and blue and white, red and blue and white, what happens to you? Well, your heart starts beating. You have an association to that. You didn't think you were programmed to feel that about that police siren and the lights, but you were, whether it's because you watched Cops a lot or you think somebody's getting in trouble, whatever. So we can really build these associations ourselves.
This is what Pavlov described when he talked about conditioning, that he managed to train a group of dogs to respond to him ringing a bell. He gave the dogs food, rang a bell, food, bell. And after a while, when he started to ring the bell, they started to salivate because they associated the two things together.
I practiced a lot of building strong associations to certain physical acts of picking up my trumpet and playing. You think of a memory that encapsulates how you want to feel when you play. I took this moment where I did well. I remember where I was standing on stage looking at my wife in the audience. And right at that moment, when I felt strong, I picked up my trumpet, put it to my lips. And maybe I played, maybe I didn't. But I did that little 15-second, 10-second exercise hundreds of times. So now, I'm kind of brainwashed. So when I pick up the trumpet, whether I'm thinking about it or not, there are some triggers. It seems pretty simple. Is it sort of like Pavlov's dog? Yeah. But there's power there. And I've experienced this firsthand with amazing results. Not that like I played amazing, but I was able to hold on to something that I wanted to in the midst of stress and bombardment of overstimulus.
So I have one of my drums for louder playing, and then I have my smaller drum, my soft playing, some tambourines. So I have like a soft tambourine, and then my stuff for louder playing, and then just another option of a tambourine just in case they wanted something else. And then since I drove, I brought other tambourines just because I had room. 3 pair of cymbals. One's for softer playing, and then some other ones for loud playing. You have to bring your own stands. Then I have triangles. So I brought 3 different triangles. Then I have this stick bag, and then more, just different options in case they want something different. Yeah, that's just about it. It adds up. And these aren't even like the main instruments. These are all like accessory instruments and your own sticks. So thank God we don't have to bring those to auditions because this is enough stuff. So I went over to the stage door at the Kennedy Center and made sure I knew what I was doing so I didn't have to worry about it. Just seeing the hall, it's like, wow, that's like, I'm gonna be playing there, and you just try to not let it overwhelm you, not freak out about it. Because like trying to tell myself like don't get nervous, you're gonna get more nervous. I mean, the most nervous I think I've gotten is when you aren't prepared like you want to be. And I just think that the more you can take control of what you do, the more your mind is gonna trust your hands and your hand trusts your mind. I tape things while I'm playing, while I'm practicing, and also I have a timer. So it kind of brings everything into focus. Every day I play, I have this little journal. It kind of looks like chicken scratch, but I have metronome markings here. So the 8th note I have at 90. And eventually what I want is, I want to get the 8th note to 138.
Memorization and learning are one thing. They're part of one big continuum. A pianist, let's say, who can learn deeply, will be able to not only play hands alone, they'll be able to play the right hand part with the left hand alone. And if they can't play the right hand and sing the left with the note names, they don't know it deeply enough. Now, many people would argue, no, that's not necessary. You don't need to learn that deeply. But I would argue that's actually normal deep learning, and highly prepared performers know their pieces that well.
I discovered I had to take these pieces way further than I ever thought I had to take them. To me, when I'm my most focused, that's the way it feels. It feels like I'm actually conducting myself, so that I have complete freedom within the music.
Deep learning is an exploration, a kind of artistic commitment that we have to make to where we become one with the material.
I'm still learning and trying to figure out what's going to be the best for me to be able to own what I'm doing even more. So it's kind of a constant learning process and experimental process, but it's helped a lot with stage fright.
You know that feeling where you wake up from a nightmare and your heart is racing? That used to happen to me, except my heart wouldn't stop racing for hours at a time. The one particular time that it was very bad was when I woke up for a midterm exam. And I had woken up from a nightmare around 4 or 5 o'clock, and this started happening to me, and my heart was racing. So when I finally got to the classroom, I said to the teacher, I was like, I don't feel well, my heart's racing. And they called the ambulance. They tested my heart rate, and my heart rate was 200 beats per minute. So they said, oh my God, you've been running a marathon all morning. They gave me a drug, and they said it's a beta blocker. And I remember being back at school after Thanksgiving break and mentioning, oh, well, I had to be in the hospital. I was just talking to a friend. And they said, oh, you have beta blockers? Can I have some? And I went, why? Why do you want beta blockers? They said, oh, well, musicians use them all the time.
I know a lot of classical musicians, many, maybe most, use beta blockers. And my experience is that if you have a physical manifestation of performance anxiety, that propranolol can be very beneficial.
I think I once counted it up, and I think I had taken about 15 auditions, and I was having a very hard time making it past the preliminary round because I just was too nervous. I tried a lot of different things for the stage fright. I did psychotherapy, I did biofeedback, acupuncture, meditation, visualization. I also tried taking tranquilizers like, Valium. I mean, I did spend years trying most of the alternative therapies. And I just had very limited success with it. I was finding out that I was just walking out on stage and just kind of like in a panic. And my problem was my bow was shaking. I would just put the bow down on the string and it would just go. Blah, 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 blah. This was like in the late 1970s. My sister is a nurse, and she had read an article that was written by Dr. Charles Brantigan in Colorado.
Well, the idea belongs to my brother, whose doctorate is in music. And one of his dissertations was on stage fright. All I can say is that we found that the stage fright phenomenon, the fight or flight reaction, could be blocked with beta-blocking drugs very effectively and at low doses. We studied a Mozart octet in a double-blind fashion, meaning nobody knew what the drug was, whether it was an active drug or a placebo, meaning a sugar pill. And then we monitored them. We brought our own coronary care unit to Nebraska and New York with us so that we could monitor people's responses. And then we had them give a performance. In New York, we had 3 experienced critics grading the quality of the performance. And the quality of the performance was uniformly better on beta-blocking drugs than without them.
It just so happened that my father was taking beta blockers. He was taking Inderal for a heart condition. My father, just lent me his Inderal, and I tried it. And I was astonished to find that for the first time in any kind of recent memory, I just felt totally calm and under control when I was playing. And I realized I had found what I thought was the solution to all my problems.
So this is my audition with the Honolulu Symphony. And this was the first audition that I actually used Enderall on. And this is during the prelims. This was the first audition that I won. And this is the audition where I got the job that I have right now. This is before the audition right here. And this is where my heart rate's hovering. And then from here to here, this is me getting escorted to the stage from my warm-up room. And then starting here, this is when we have all of our excerpts. So my heart rate average during this audition was 106 beats per minute. Heart rate max was 153. Coming from previous auditions spiking at 179 and never getting below 150 to having it be, oh, now I'm averaging about 100 beats per minute.
The beta-blocking drug binds to the beta receptor on the cells and stops whatever it is that the beta receptor was causing the cell to do.
You stop the shaking, you stop the stomach aches, you stop the sweating, you stop all the physical things that could be caused by too much adrenaline.
I had to perform Brooks' Call Me Dry with an orchestra. And I loved this piece so much, but I got myself into a terrible state about it. And I got hold of some beta blockers, and all the adrenal responses that I was used to, my head would say, oh, are your arms shaking? And then my arms would start to shake. But what happened when I took a beta blocker was like, are your arms shaking? It was like, no, they're not. And I felt like I had a degree of control over my body. I remember I played well. I remember it went really well. I didn't make any mistakes, but I remember feeling very flat.
You know, you're dealing with beta blockers, which if you take too many of them in one day can make you feel a little nauseous or can make you feel really detached from reality.
They will put a significant number of people into the feeling of a fog. People say, I just feel fatigued. I feel like I'm almost in a dream-like state. Propranolol will slow down the heart rate. It will lower the blood pressure. If they mix it with alcohol, it can drive it lower still. Erectile dysfunction while taking them, that's very common. Occasionally, it can actually trigger or worsen someone's asthma. Some people may have an unusual cardiac condition where their heart's conduction is not quite normal. And by slowing it down or interfering with it in some way, it might make that person have no cardiac function. In general, it is highly unlikely to have an adverse reaction from 10 or 20 milligrams of propranolol, but I think we're looking at large numbers of people taking any medicine that has effects on the heart, effects of dropping blood pressure. It's only reasonable to be cautious.
So what scares me is when you hear even young musicians taking beta blockers that they obtained not through their physician, but through peers or teachers or other sources.
I guess people just kind of share them. It's kind of a taboo thing, but people do it.
I actually had a guitar student who had both beta blockers and Valium, and he gave them to me.
My friend had a prescription for beta blockers, and I asked him for one, and he gave me one.
If there was somebody that I met in college who said, here, take this, try this, it'll make your performance better or it will stop you from getting nervous, I probably would have tried it. That sounds very appealing.
I did ask some colleagues what they do, and a lot of them said they did take beta blockers. This isn't something anybody talks about. I never heard any singer in any gig that I've ever done talk about taking medication, either anxiety medication or beta blockers.
I absolutely did not discuss this with my use of beta blockers with anybody. I did not tell my teacher. I did not tell any of my fellow students. I found that, certainly early on, there were a lot of people who were just very judgmental about it. They feel maybe it made you perform better or it gave you an edge over somebody else who didn't use it. And I think just a lot of people don't really understand that it doesn't make you perform any better than you normally would. It just stops you from becoming a wreck if you're crippled.
I think partly because of its association with medication in sports, there's a parallel in some people's minds of cheating or shortcuts, and we're not supposed to like shortcuts.
It's not a shortcut. I mean, I cannot emphasize this enough. It will not make you a better player. If you're really, really well prepared, it can just help you be a little bit more confident about presenting what you've prepared. But it doesn't, practice for you, for instance. I wish it did.
It's not cheating. It's not a shortcut, and there's no replacement for preparation. But you have a chance to play as well as you play in the practice room. And I don't think that there's anything that anybody could say to convince me that that's the wrong path to take.
Guess we're targeting the Forum. We'll try to find some parking. Yeah, I was thinking on the way over here, this is kind of like, it's the perfect marriage between like a martial arts exhibition and a poker game. You know, you have to bring it, but it's so much about the mental game from now until I actually play. There's that whole other element of being in a metropolitan area for the first time that you've never visited before, and having to kind of find your way around. I know we're in the vicinity here. I'm guessing it's over there. It's not a concert hall. That's the State Museum. Damn it. This is turning into quite an odyssey. This is why you aim for an hour early. It says it's right behind us. Yeah, so I think that's the building, and I think that's the, if we can find a parking spot around here. It's a handicap spot, naturally. And this is a no parking area. Great. All right, nailed it. Maybe here? Here. All right. Let's just pretend that what just happened didn't happen.
We arrived this morning, got lost for about 25 minutes, and I had a little bit less time than I anticipated. As soon as I got into a room, I took my beta blocker to try and mellow myself out after spending all this time being lost and flailing around outside. There were people on all sides of me warming up in other rooms that you can very clearly hear and everything. And contrary to my own advice to myself, I decided to just start kind of plowing through some excerpts and kind of psyched myself out into a more anxious state of mind than I really would have liked. I got taken into another final holding room, which was essentially a tiled bathroom, and it was about 20 degrees warmer. The bass freaked out, and the strings kind of all went out of tune in different directions. Which kind of rattled me a little bit more, and I had just seen a couple of people come off the stage who had just played, who were, very respectable, high-level players. But I did my best to settle myself down, and my heart was racing a bit. And so once I got out on stage, I played through my excerpts one by one, and everything went fairly well in terms of my preparation, but everything had problems or little panic moments. When it came time to discuss who had advanced out of the first 10 people, they chose one person, and that person was not me. There's a little bit of a consolation in knowing that it's not that I didn't advance playing my best, but that I didn't advance because I had issues with performance anxiety, and that medicine isn't the panacea for that anyway. That I still need to make sure that the mental bedrock that I'm approaching this from is solid, rather than going in and assuming that I'm gonna get fixed up by having a beta blocker in my system.
I think we all get nervous when we perform, and I think there's a million ways to, deal with that problem. I usually go with all of the other ways that one can, shore up their foundation before suggesting the beta blockers piece of it, which I think is a very helpful piece. But I think it's the finishing touch on top of the foundation, which has to be strong.
You could take 80 milligrams of Inderol and still feel dread and extreme nervousness. Extreme nervousness. Your heart's not beating fast, but your brain is still freaking out.
For those who've tried beta blockers, and taking the physical stuff off the table still doesn't take away the worries and the fears of judgment, or am I good enough for this job? If those things don't stop, they're still thinking about the wrong stuff.
No one would ever say to my face the things that I've said to myself in my head. Like, man, this is just like, you're bad. You don't ever sound that good. Like, you're just, you don't work hard enough. You've got a really bad ear. Like, you just don't know when you're in tune or not. Like, you really are just like not a good musician.
One of the things that happens with people who are highly skilled is that as they practice and develop their skills over many years, it starts to happen automatically. Once something's happened automatically, you no longer notice or appreciate that you're doing it. You tend to take that level of skill for granted. But the only way they got to that level of skill in the first place was by noticing increasingly finer details that they could continue developing, noticing the things that didn't yet match their high standards. So the combination of not noticing the skills they already have and noticing everything that isn't quite the way they want it to be is what gives them the impression that they're not that skilled.
I wish I had had the experience of someone telling me, we have performance anxiety, we have like these negative feelings about our playing because they come from a good place. They come from the place of wanting to get better.
I remember once my senior recital was playing the Brahms F minor sonata. The piano has several bars and the viola comes in ba, ba, bum, out of nowhere. And I don't know why I missed this, but I missed that note by maybe a whole step. And I heard it and I adjusted and I heard ra, da, da. I got the tape back a week later and listened to my performance, got to this spot and I heard ba, ba, bum. I went back over this 6 or 8 times. I remembered that because it marred the recital so much. It was not there. I heard this before it got out of the viola. So we have Superman ears, really, when we're playing. And that's one of the problems that leads to stage fright.
Everything, all of the shaking, all the shortness of breath, all of the problems that were coming out on my instrument, that was the problem. And that is not something that I think any beta blocker could fix.
I kind of drank socially when I was like a teenager because that's what we do. We Brits, we drink. And I remember feeling much more relaxed and kind of more confident. As the time went on, the anxiety was kind of it just kind of got worse. I was at music college, there was a lot of pressure. At first, I carried alcohol around with me just in case. And I kind of kept my head above water by doing performances where people said, that was great. And I was like, oh, okay. So it kind of made me think, well, whatever's happening in my mind or in, whatever kind of shameful using and drinking I'm doing, as long as I can perform and people think that I'm good, like, I'm okay. I was 23 when a therapist told me, you're an alcoholic. And I was like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. I think the drinking and the taking stuff, it was all to keep it inside, like, rather than be messy, publicly messy. There's a version of myself that I want to present. There's a version of the musician I am that I want to present. I want to look perfect and like everyone else. And I don't want to be found out that I'm frightened.
Since what we do as musicians is so closely associated with who we are, or at least that's how we think to ourselves, an admission that performing makes me nervous. The very thing that I'm supposed to be, a performer, that very thing scares me. Why would anybody want to talk openly about that? And so for there to be a true dialogue about it, there has to be a realization that, yes, for me, I'm a violinist, I am a performer, but I'm a person separate from that as well. Performing is something I do, playing the violin is something I do, it's a way that I express myself, but it does not define me.
So a lot of it is just self-acceptance and trying not to have myself, have the ridiculously high standards for myself that I will always fall short of. I'm not a perfect cellist. I'm not someone who's fearless. I make mistakes. I'm human. I think the culture, especially amongst string players, it's like perfectionism, how many hours of practice you've done, obsessing about the shape of your bow hold, about the speed of your vibrato, intonation, all of that stuff. And that stuff is all really important, obviously, but I think I can definitely get obsessed with that to the point where I forget that it's a beautiful tune I'm playing.
It's a little strange, isn't it, that maybe you, like me, you were attracted to music as a child because it gave you a kind of experience nothing else did, and it was a kind of communication and a kind of art that's very distinct. In other words, when we're making music together, or if I'm making music and you're listening and other people are listening, we just all become one with the music. It's an extraordinary feeling. And to think that that's not one of the primary aims of a music education is strange, that we would want to train people to be musical construction workers rather than creative artists.
Conservatories are just beginning to scratch the surface of preparing musicians for the real world of music. It's been very slow, and sometimes conservatories have been very reticent to do anything other than train musicians to be the greatest technicians on their instrument and then toss them out into the world and hope for the best.
It really has a lot to do with right notes. You know, who can play the right notes the fastest, or who can play the hardest piece the best, the most accurately.
As a professor at the Trinity Conservatoire here also, I find that there's so many little bits of timetabling you have to respect, because kids have to do an assessment for scales at this particular date, then they have to do this and that, and actually it interferes with their development.
It's an interesting dilemma. Many music schools have certain criteria. You must perform these pieces for this jury at this level, and it becomes institutionalized performance anxiety training. The students who are locked-stepped into a curriculum or are being misguided and giving things that are hard because the teacher thinks, oh, you have to learn this repertoire, so you better do it now. So there are portions of a piece or portions of a song they just get through, but they can't really control. Sometimes the students themselves are misguided and they think the way they're going to become more advanced is to play harder and harder things.
I can have somebody come in and have a repertoire that's dotted with big pieces, and I will give them that little B major nocturne. But the end of that is so magical. It's so wild. It's one of the wildest things Chopin ever wrote, where it goes into minor, recitative, and ends with a minor chord. Can you integrate those two polar opposites, no pun intended with Chopin, and can you play that beautifully? I really believe this, but I'm not popular. They want to skip the invention and then the nocturne, that's for high school kids. Let's get on to the real stuff, the Appassionata. I don't want to play the Pathétique. You can't play the Appassionata until you've played the Pathétique. You've got to bring the Pathétique pathos to the Appassionata passion. You have to. It's great to learn the notes, but wait a little bit. Let them grow a little bit.
Some people need to spend a lot more time on technically less demanding, but still artistically rich music, so they can acquire practice and performance skills.
In a university, generally, students are playing one time a year. They're playing their exam or their recital, and they're not playing in public. So coming out of university, I was nervous on stage. I developed quite a bit of stage nerves.
One of the difficulties for musicians is that the process of practicing is fundamentally different from the process of performing. In order to practice effectively, you've got to notice what you're doing and noticing how much of it is matching what you actually want and how much you want to change. So I'm continually making a comparison between what I'm doing and how closely it matches what I want. And that's fundamentally different from performing. If people do that in performance, it tends to be less than useful. Performance is usually about being totally immersed in the moment and really enjoying expressing yourself freely and musically.
So another thing that's lacking in the training is people aren't learning performance skills and they aren't getting opportunities to practice them.
One solution that we've been working on here at the Royal College of Music is to provide access to a simulated performance environment. So we run our performance simulator at the moment in two modes. We have an audition simulation where people can practice their auditioning skills, and we have a small audience recital simulation. In both cases, what we're doing is we're giving people that chance not only to go out on stage and interact with a virtual audience, but they arrive and they're treated in exactly the same way as they would if they're going to a real audition or to a real recital. They're met by a backstage manager. Both the backstage manager and the musician walk to the backstage area. We have people wait back here for about 5 minutes. They have to be very quiet because the audience or the audition panel are just on the other side of the door. Now, while that's happening, we'll be monitoring performers in terms of their heart rate, perhaps their skin temperature. We might even take some saliva samples to look at stress hormones. We may also have them fill out some questionnaires so that we can monitor how anxious they are at that particular point in time. And then when everything is done and ready, the backstage manager opens the door and the performer walks out to the stage area. And what we can do from the backstage area is to control how those virtual audience members and the virtual audition panel interact and start to distract the performer. So the audience may sneeze or cough, or their telephones may go. In the audition panel, we can set them to listen to that audition in a very positive, happy mode, or in a different mode, or they can actually listen in a disappointed mode, where they're visibly disappointed with what's actually happening on stage. Setting up a music educational system where students feel able to talk not only about how to play the notes and how to sound like performer X or performer Y, but also are able to be open about the challenges that they're having is very important.
There's a deep shame that I had about the fact that I was secretly medicating myself, that I was, I was ashamed that I was taking beta blockers. I was ashamed that I was drinking. I'm glad that I'm not doing those things anymore, but I don't give myself a hard time that that's the method that I chose because I was desperate. I didn't know any other way. Like, I remember going to this seminar when I was at college about performance anxiety, and it was so ineffective. And it was this guy who was a musician, and he was quite dry, and he was talking about eating bananas before a performance because of the natural potassium. And at this point, I was taking like 120 milligrams of beta blockers a day, and I was like, I'd have to eat 1,500 bananas, or I could just take this pill that's in my handbag and have a drink, and then I went there desperate to hear something that was going to like change everything, and I heard that.
I would say things to my piano teacher, who was just wonderful and supportive, but he would tell me, I'm not worried about you, so you shouldn't worry. That was very supportive, but not helpful.
Well, certainly as being a voice teacher, there's a lot of therapist that goes into that. Sometimes more than you want it to be or that you're qualified to do. And I frequently have felt unqualified to handle some of the issues that some of my singers have brought in.
I am not a psychologist. And stage fright does not come from just having had a memory slip in the Appassionata 2 weeks ago when you played it. Stage fright is probably a product of many, many years of buildup, just the way an iceberg is. Well, I can't cure that in an hour lesson from 2:30 to 3:30 on Thursday. And I wouldn't try.
When it comes to providing the holistic education that a musician needs, I think we need to get away from the master-apprentice model. Young people can recognize that one teacher who inspires them, who is a thrilling role model and a wonderful mentor, may not be all they need. We should honor and celebrate what the greatest musicians around us can offer young people. And we should not put them in the position where they're expected to do everything that young person requires. So I've actually proposed a different model. I call it the mentor's apprentice model, where we can have performance coaches, we can have Alexander technique teachers, we can have people that help you learn to practice, people that help you develop an artistic vision so you have an authentic sense of why you're making music. And then we need to think about what is the structure in which we're providing music learning, and why are we putting people in these standardized types of curricula. It's kind of, it would be funny if it weren't so tragic.
I'm aware now that I'm a good bass player, like I'm not the best by any means, but like, if you've got a symphony that you need to be played, like I can do it. But it's taken me really a year of not playing to get that perspective. It's the longest I've put it down. I hope that it's the longest I ever put it down. I hope that we, as a community of musicians, start to think about this as a problem that needs community support. It needs information, it needs education. You know, we need to be telling the students that are going through conservatories that you're gonna figure this out as you go along.
It took me 8 years of taking auditions before I won. I don't know how many I took. Sometimes I'm afraid to count. When I was about 29 that year, I thought, okay, it's really time to not be afraid of auditions and prepare completely for once. And I just thought, okay, I'm gonna use this experience as a laboratory for my own art. I'm gonna make myself better at what I do. I'm gonna get to a deeper level of understanding about how the music is built, how to express it, how my instrument works, how I work. Paradoxically, I started doing very well auditioning and winning jobs when I stopped trying to win jobs. I stopped trying to take an audition, stopped playing for approval, stopped trying to gain employment. When I started approaching it that way and stopped playing excerpts, started playing arias, and started trying to express the music and just sound well and make it feel good for myself, I was no longer nervous.
I learned something very simple. I think these words come from Heifetz, probably, the great violinist. He said, practice as if your life depended on it, but perform as if you don't care. And actually, those words are so true, because I know, and I'm sure that everybody else, as artists, might agree with me. When you really feel you have nothing to lose, it elevates your playing in a way that is almost unimaginable.
Sometimes the size of a problem may just in itself seem insurmountable. And it's just about understanding the nitty-gritty, some of the details about how we as individuals respond to performance. That's why with scientific research into performance anxiety, we don't have a cure, we don't have a one-size-fits-all solution. It's often about an individual journey to see where we are and how our experience changes over time. And then to see, well, what can I do specifically to address this problem?
I do think it's important for people to realize there is no one right way. I think seeing a variety of modalities is important because some people love yoga, for example. I have no interest in yoga. Some people love hypnosis. Some people love mindfulness training. I mean, Alexander is a form of mindfulness training. Some people love meditation. The point being is find what, it's like, what's the best kind of exercise? The answer is the one you'll do. I mean, that's the classic answer, right? Okay. Find what works for you.
Exercising over time is a stressor. And when you do it over time, your body gets very efficient at dealing with the stress of exercise.
I know some players that have taken essential oils and put them on the rag that they put on their lap, and then before they have a big solo coming up, they'll take a whiff of that.
So this is the Stress Eraser, and it's a biofeedback machine. It kind of tracks your breathing.
It was like self-hypnosis for dummies or something like that. I found it in a bookstore. You read the script into a mic, and then you listen back to yourself. And I think it works. I remember one of the things I did was a concerto for orchestra. It's like a high lick, a bunch of high D flats in a row. I got the first one, and I missed all the rest of them, but I barreled through it like That was the note that was written. I'm like, you know, so what? You know, and I was waiting for them to ask me to play it again because I was going to tell them no. But it was so convincing. Even though they knew it was the wrong note, I still won the job.
I see a therapist in Washington, just a good old sit on a chair and talk about life therapist.
There's a Don Green centering technique that I love.
You just make sure you're so prepared with what you're playing so that there's no element of doubt anywhere.
After you're done performing, say one thing 100% positive about some aspect of what you just did. What did you do well?
It's persistence. If you want to do anything well, you have to be persistent about it.
It's about all the routine that happens in the young age when children don't know any different. Like, oh, now it's time to eat. Now it's time to practice. And now I'm gonna walk out on stage. You know, it's like, it's almost the same.
Very often a student feels that the professional or the teacher has got it all sorted and that they just have to somehow live up to that. They don't realize that each person has their own journey and has to find their own way.
There's a line in The Matrix, the movie, when Neo goes to see the Oracle. She points to the sign over the door. It says Temet Nosce, which means in Latin, know yourself. Know yourself. It's good advice.